Hey there, I'm James Bush, and I want to talk about descriptive imagery and storytelling, what I've learned on a journey into public speaking and communicating. So, stories change everything. Stories help you to be much more memorable, and they also allow the audience to remember what you were talking about as compared to using facts alone. You've got a few different tools when storytelling. Narrative arc, you'll know this from watching movies or reading books. Setup, tension, resolution. Every story needs moments of high and moments of low. Something that the audience hooks into and it drives their emotions. Metaphor and analogy, comparing something to something else perhaps that the audience already understands, can help them to get a grasp on what you're talking about. Reverse engineering the feeling. So, let's say I want to inspire people. I want them to feel maybe grateful. With that feeling in mind, I can build a story that rises my audience up towards the feeling I'm trying to get them to walk out with. When you think about the purpose of your speech, of your presentation, what feeling would help you most if your audience were feeling that? Sensory language, or very descriptive language. I'll give you some examples of this in a minute, but sight, sound, feeling, all the five senses, they help create visceral mental images. This is the way that we remember things. We often remember the pictures that we see, and we remember the way that we felt. So the story spine technique is a way that we can create stories very quickly. We'll go through that. And one recommendation for you is to begin creating your own personal story library. A lot of the speaking that I do these days, I often am going back through stories that I've used before and recycling them, reforming them to match the occasion. So let's look at the story spine template quickly. This is something that, for example, Pixar has used. So we've got 7 parts. You start with once, or once upon a time, then every day, so looking at the more general day-to-day pattern, until one day when the pattern gets broken. Because of that, so the consequence, because of that again, so the consequences from that, until finally, and then ever since. So you can apply this structure, which we'll cover that again in just a moment. You can apply that to some real work experience. You can practice delivering that in 3 minutes. Can you picture the scene? Did you feel something? And you can begin building your story library. So let's dive a little deeper. Once upon a time, you establish your character, the world, your stakes. You express what's normal with every day. You then go into until one day, the consequences, the resolution, and the takeaway. So, I've jumped around a bit. Let me tell you about when I was a kid. I used to go to a beach on a small island near my house. It had the most beautiful, soft, fine white sand and stunning aquamarine water that just whispered to invite you in. And I remember the smell of sea salt in the breeze and hot, chocolatey notes, because they would bring a hot chocolate at the little hotel, the family hotel we stayed at when we went there. It was heaven. Here's the thing, around the island there were really strong currents. And as a kid, I couldn't understand this. I was told not to go and swim in the water, but I was young and I was a bit mischievous. So one morning, me and my friend stepped down a little too far into the water, and the current picked us up. And I remember my mum screaming as I began to swim to the shore as quickly as I could, but the current was dragging me away, and it dragged us hundreds of meters. down the beach. But we kicked and kicked and kicked until finally we made it back to the shore. So that's an example of applying the story spine structure. Once upon a time, so we were at this hotel every day. We used to go there, and normally I was a good boy, until one day I stepped out a little too far, and because of that, the water dragged us away, until finally we got back. So one thing I didn't include then is, ever since then, why does this matter? Well, when are you swimming too far away from the shore? So, sensory upgrade. Specificity is so valuable to speakers because it allows you to create images in people's minds. When I was talking about the beach and the soft, fine white sand and the aquamarine water, could you imagine being at a beach like that? Could you imagine the smell of hot cocoa? So here's an exercise for you. Try and describe a professional event using only abstract language. It was difficult, it was tense. Use only non-sensory language. Then try and rewrite it afterwards with some sensory aspects. Smell, taste, temperature, the sights you could see. What did you hear? What did you see? What was physically felt in the room? And read both aloud and see which version do you see or experience in your mind more clearly. So here's another little exercise. Try and take a concept in your work perhaps and use a metaphor or an analogy to explain it very simply to someone perhaps much younger, a 12-year-old or grandparent, and see how well that metaphor sticks. Do people remember it better? I used to teach students a lot, and that involved teaching abstract science concepts. As often as I could, I would find a way to talk about it in simpler, more practical ways. For example, we talked about how liquid transported itself through a plant. One of the analogies I used was talking about a straw and how you use a straw when you suck up juice. So, 5 story types you might want to think about making. And I'll give you an example of one of these. So your origin story, why you come to do what you do now. A failure story, time you got it wrong. Customer or human story, someone whose life you changed perhaps. An analogy, as we were just talking about. And a challenge. If you do a challenge one, try and incorporate how you overcame it and what the benefit of that was. So, let me talk to you about perhaps my origin story. The moment I cared about communication. See, at ages 11, 14, 18, 21, so many times I completely was moved, I was uprooted from where we lived, and my family moved often across like a continent or something, and I had no connections, no friendships at the new schools whenever I got there. So every day I got used to being alone. Until 21, I realized I had no one. I was exhausted from the social isolation, and I knew I wanted to start building a life with more connections in it, more people in it. And I had to work out how to build relationships quickly that would last. So for 10 years I studied courses and tried tricks for human connection, conversation, until one day, miraculously, I stumbled on the right balance of connecting, speaking, listening, and also challenging. All of a sudden, people wanted to speak to me. to chat, to be friends. And I met my fiance, and suddenly I've had the confidence to take social leaps I've never even dreamed of. So, social skills and learning to communicate has changed my life, and that's why I care so much about this kind of work. So, that's it for today. What's your main takeaway? Let me know. Which one of these stories right here would you try and write first? See if you can use that story spine structure and some very descriptive language or an analogy. See how that helps you. Perhaps it will help you to communicate even more powerfully.